As the shores of Normandy turned blood red, Captain George Devon had only a damaged radio and a daring lie at his disposal. At 7:35 a.m. on June 6, 1944, as thousands of American soldiers were landing on Omaha Beach, Devon changed the course of history with a single decision. He intercepted the enemy's radio frequency and executed a 30-second bluff. Captain George Devon was a 29-year-old radio operator who could speak 8 different languages. After studying linguistics at Oxford University, he joined the American Army at the beginning of the war. Devon's German was perfect, authentic and without accent. He had spent 3 years of his childhood in Berlin, internalizing German culture and language. His Austrian mother had given him the advantage of speaking German like a native. When America entered the war in 1940, those with language skills were being recruited for special operations. Devon's linguistic talent directed him straight to the Special Communications Unit. For 2 years, he translated intercepted German messages, monitored radio communications, and occasionally sent counterintelligence messages. However, at the end of 1943, everything would change for Devon. He was summoned to an old apartment in Grosvenor Square, London. From the outside, the apartment looked ordinary, but inside it was headquarters where the highest-level intelligence operations of the Allied forces were planned. Colonel William Harrison took Devon into a small room. The walls were covered with maps, one particularly catching the eye, the shores of Normandy. "Devon, everything you've learned and done until today was merely preparation for what you're about to do," said Harrison. "I'm going to tell you about a major operation. An operation that will change the course of history." Devon had been informed about the D-Day plan 6 months in advance and selected for a special mission. His task was simple: listen to German communications and transmit counterintelligence messages when necessary. But no one, Devon included, could have predicted how critical that morning would be. The preparation process was intense. Devon had to learn the smallest nuances of German army communications. He studied the command structure, rank system, and even the local dialects used by specific units. He practiced for hours to mimic the speech patterns of German officers. Colonel Harrison said, "The moment your voice is heard, they must not suspect you're American. Your survival and the survival of thousands of soldiers depend on it." Devon wasn't content with memorizing German military jargon and codes. He also learned Nazi communication protocols, encryption systems, and radio etiquette. British intelligence had cracked the codes used by the German 352nd Infantry Division, and Devon had to integrate these codes into his daily conversations. "In any moment of doubt, use the Siegfried code," he was instructed. This signifies a high priority and urgent command order. When Germans hear this code, they can't risk it and will follow the order without question. Devon was given a special radio. The SER 300 was a standard American Army radio, but this one had been modified to broadcast on German frequencies. A small German-made FUG 7 transceiver had been concealed inside the radio. This would give Devon access to the German radio network. "Protect this radio with your life," Harrison said. "Its use is only authorized in critical situations. And remember, if you're caught, you'll be executed for espionage." A week before the Normandy landings, Devon was transferred to Portland Harbor in southern England. There were thousands of soldiers, hundreds of ships, and endless bustle. Everyone was preparing for the largest amphibious operation in history. Devon would be part of the third wave, attached to a special communications team with the 16th Infantry Regiment. On the night of June 5, favorable weather conditions were reported. Operation Overlord was launched. Thousands of soldiers boarded ships. Devon checked his equipment one last time: an SER 300 radio in a waterproof bag, spare batteries, a list of German frequencies, and a small German-American military terms dictionary. They began crossing the English Channel in the dead of night. Wave height reached 2 meters and most soldiers were suffering from seasickness. Devon clung to the side of the ship, constantly praying as they approached the shores of Normandy. At dawn, they faced a hellish scene on the shore. The first wave landing forces had suffered heavy casualties. Omaha Beach was one of the most challenging areas of the Normandy invasion. German defenses were strong, MG-42 machine guns could sweep every point on the beach, and 88mm guns were pounding the shoreline. The casualty rate of the first wave landing forces approached 70%. The second wave faced a similar fate. Devon turned to the artillery officer next to him and said, "This is a suicide mission." The officer nodded in agreement. "But we have no other choice." As their LCVP landing craft approached the shore, the scene became even more horrific. The beach was littered with bodies, wounded soldiers were seeking shelter, and German artillery shells were falling into the sea every second. Their boat was hit when they were 400 meters from shore. An 88mm shell struck the front section directly. The front of the boat was shattered, killing 8 soldiers inside instantly. The explosion threw Devon and other soldiers into the sea. Devon found himself in the ice-cold waters of Normandy. Survival seemed almost impossible, but Devon's priority was to complete the special mission assigned to him. He surfaced, trying to protect the special radio equipment in his backpack. Trying to advance in the waters of Omaha Beach with all his equipment was like swimming against the current. Around him, bullets were hitting the water, screams were heard, and explosions were going off. For a moment, he almost abandoned the SCR-300 radio. The 18-pound equipment was pulling him down, threatening to drown him. But if he let go of the radio, his mission would fail. With one final effort, Devon kept the bag on his back and moved toward the shore. Upon reaching the beach, he immediately sought cover. He took shelter behind the body of a dead American soldier. He pulled the radio from his bag and checked if it was still working. By chance, the equipment was still operational. But part of the screen was cracked and some buttons were missing. He began scanning German frequencies. The first few channels were empty or had only static. Then suddenly he heard clear German speech. Ritter 1, this is Eagle. We're updating artillery fire coordinates. Intensify on the middle section of Omaha. The American second wave is reaching the shore. Devon's circulation quickened. He was listening to German artillery fire being directed in real time. The next fire order would mean the death of thousands of American soldiers. Because the 4th and 5th waves of landing forces were heading precisely to that area. Devon pulled out the small notebook he had brought with him and noted the coordinates. He also wrote down the ranks and names of the speakers. He confirmed that the communication belonged to the German 352nd Infantry Division. This information was invaluable, but to transmit it, he first needed to communicate with his own side. He switched to the American channel and gave a call sign. Thunder 1, this is Echo 7. Emergency. Enemy artillery coordinates obtained. Transmit. He heard only static. He tried again but still received no response. Devon's radio could pick up German frequencies, but it appeared it could not broadcast on the American channel. It had been damaged. He looked around. Hundreds of American soldiers were trapped on the beach. They were not in a position to move or make progress. The landing was about to fail. D-Day was about to become a fiasco in history. Death was everywhere. To Devon's left, a 19-year-old soldier had lost his leg and was screaming for help. To his right, a group of soldiers were trying to build sand fortifications but weren't very successful under German fire. The troops in the middle section of Omaha were completely exposed, defenseless. Devon checked the radio in his hand again. Being tuned to the German frequency meant he could not only listen but also broadcast. The German dialects he had learned in the linguistics department at Oxford University came alive in his mind. He could speak like a German commander. He hesitated for a moment. He knew that if caught, he would be shot immediately. Providing false information to the Germans was espionage under international laws of war. But he had no other choice. The water at the bottom of the boat was rising, and hundreds of American soldiers on the shore were about to die. Devon could save thousands of lives thanks to his profession and ability. All he had to do was say the right words. Before pressing the broadcast button, Devon thought one last time. I can do this, he said to himself. I have to do this. He took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and completely transformed himself into a German officer. Devon pressed the broadcast button on the radio and fully transformed himself into a German officer. With a Prussian accent, he began to speak confidently. Eagle 1, this is Colonel Steiner, 352nd Artillery Commander. Priority change. Shift artillery fire to the eastern flank. I repeat, shift fire to the eastern flank. The Americans are infiltrating from Point D, breaking our defense line. Use the destruction codes. Siegfried 773. There was a brief silence from the radio speaker. Devon's heart was pounding in his chest. If his bluff failed, the Germans could trace his position and target him directly. Or worse, they could ignore the order. Finally, a response came. Colonel Steiner? We don't understand. There's no reported infiltration at Point D. Our reconnaissance units report a clear view. Devon's stomach knotted. They were suspicious. He needed to think quickly. Relying on his training, he made his tone even more authoritative, mimicking the exact intonation of Colonel Wilhelm Steiner. Captain, is this an order dispute? It's clear your troops at Point D can't report. The Americans have cut your communication lines. Information from the radar station shows a large-scale landing operation focused on the eastern flank. Shift the guns now or your career ends here. Devon was using the real names of German commanders and actual destruction codes. This information had been obtained through months of intelligence work. The code Siegfried 773 was a real priority change code used by German artillery units. There was a brief silence from the radio. There was a moment when Devon thought he might have failed. But then a response came. Understood, Colonel Steiner. Artillery fire is being redirected to the eastern flank. Code verified. Awaiting new coordinates. Devon continued in his role as the German colonel. Coordinates, between Sector E7 and F2. Secondary target, American armor 800 meters inland. No tolerance for delay. Act now. The radio responded with, understood again, and the line closed. Devon's hand holding the microphone was trembling. In 30 seconds he had told a lie and tried to change the fate of thousands of soldiers. Now all he had to do was wait to see if his lie would work. Devon put down the radio and tried to advance along the shore. He could feel his heart beating wildly in his chest. What he had done was crazy, risky, and dangerous. But it was their only chance to change the direction of deadly artillery fire. In the first few minutes nothing changed. German artillery shells were still falling on the middle section of Omaha. Devon began to think his bluff had failed. Perhaps the German commanders were suspicious and were taking time to verify the truth. Then the first signs of change began to appear. 3 minutes later, the number of artillery shells falling on the middle section of Omaha began to decrease. 5 minutes later, artillery fire had been redirected to the eastern section of Omaha. Devon saw that the soldiers around him had noticed. They were lifting their heads and looking around. The artillery fire had stopped. There was a moment with a chance of survival. Move forward, an officer shouted. Now move. The American soldiers on the beach began to advance along the shore, emerging from the dead spot. Devon joined them, carrying the valuable radio in his backpack. They moved along the beach, running behind sand bunkers, moving toward the beach hills. Devon turned the radio on again and began to listen. There was great confusion in the German lines. Why was the fire redirected to the east? The Americans are advancing in the middle section. Colonel Steiner's orders. They're supposedly infiltrating from Point D. There's nothing at Point D. Who gave these orders? Where is Colonel Steiner? Find him immediately. Devon smiled as he listened to the chaos his 30-second bluff had created. He had temporarily paralyzed the German chain of command. This had given American soldiers the time they needed to advance along the beach. American troops began to reach the beach hills. They were approaching the first German trenches. Devon joined a group of soldiers and they crossed a hill. Ahead, a German machine gun nest appeared. The Americans quickly deployed and opened fire. After a short skirmish, the nest was captured. Brigadier General Norman Coda had gathered soldiers on the shore and was pushing them forward. Rangers, lead the way. Move out, he shouted. Coda's leadership and courage were inspiring the soldiers on the beach. Devon approached Coda and reported that he had changed the direction of German artillery fire. Coda looked at Devon in amazement. How did you manage this, Captain? I bluffed, sir. I got on the German frequency and told them there was a landing on the eastern flank. Coda thought for a moment. That was a risky move. I had no other choice, sir. Coda nodded. Good work, Captain. Now move forward and continue communication. Devon moved with the advancing troops. He continued to monitor German frequencies but didn't broadcast again. One bluff had worked, but a second might arouse suspicion. By around 3 p.m., most of Omaha had been secured. American troops had advanced 2 kilometers inland. The confusion among the Germans still continued. The real Colonel Steiner had finally appeared and stated that he had not given the order to direct artillery fire to the eastern flank. However, by that time, American forces had largely advanced. Devon was brought to a temporary command center in a small village in a farmhouse. Major Robert Williams approached Devon. Captain, General Coda told me. This was the bravest bluff in history. Devon humbly bowed his head. I did my duty, sir. Can you continue to monitor German frequencies? It will be valuable for intelligence. Devon listened to and translated German communications for the rest of the day. In the evening hours, a German message caught his attention. Report to command. Due to today's communication confusion, the defense in the middle section of Omaha Beach collapsed. The Americans advanced 2 kilometers inland. We are preparing for a counterattack. When Devon translated this message, a smile spread across his face. His 30-second bluff had played a critical role in the success of the Normandy landing. The next day, Devon was told he would meet with General Omar Bradley. Bradley was the commander of the U.S. First Army and was overseeing the operations at Omaha Beach. He greeted Devon in front of his tent. "Captain Devon, I've received a report about the action you performed yesterday," said Bradley. It was a bold move. Devon stood at attention. "Thank you, sir." "However," said Bradley, "there are risks to such tactics. If the Germans realize they can infiltrate our communication channels, they might take stricter security measures. Therefore what you did must remain secret." "Understood." Devon nodded. "Yes, sir." "You did a good job, Captain. Continue your duties and continue monitoring communications. But don't broadcast on German frequencies again unless I specifically order it." "Understood, sir." Devon remained in Normandy for the following weeks, listening to and translating German communications. As American troops advanced inland, Devon's role became increasingly important. He provided valuable intelligence about German troop movements, supply routes and tactical plans. In July, Devon was called back to London. The course of the war had changed. The Allied forces were firmly established in Normandy and were preparing for the liberation of Paris. Devon met with Colonel Harrison in the same apartment in Grosvenor Square. Harrison opened a file on his desk. "Captain Devon, I've prepared a report about your action at Omaha Beach. For historians after the war." "Thank you, sir. However, in the current situation, this report will remain classified. The tactic you used is too valuable for future operations. We don't want the Germans to know about it." Devon nodded. "Understood, sir." "I want to give you your next assignment," said Harrison. "You'll go to Paris. The city hasn't been liberated yet, but it will be soon. You'll join the underground resistance movement and help them with German communications." Devon's eyes lit up. "Paris, sir? This is an honor." Harrison smiled. "I chose you because you have a proven ability, Captain. The ability to tell the right lie at the right time. This is exactly what we need to win this war." Devon was secretly smuggled into Paris in August 1944. He worked with the French resistance, monitored German communications and sometimes, when necessary, spread misinformation. On August 25, Paris was liberated. Devon was one of the first Allied soldiers to walk on the Champs-Élysées. Devon continued intelligence duties for the rest of the war. He advanced all the way to Berlin and witnessed Germany's surrender in May 1945. After the war, Devon's action was kept secret. The Cold War had begun, and the American Army wanted to keep communication deception tactics secret. Devon was awarded the Distinguished Service Medal, but the real reason wasn't stated. According to records, he had been rewarded for superior leadership and courage. In 1953, when Devon returned to civilian life, he began working as a linguistics professor at Oxford University. He would tell his students about the power of communication, how language could start and end wars. But he never told his own story. In his classes he would often say, "Words can be more powerful than weapons. The right words spoken at the right time can be more effective than armies." Devon taught at Oxford for 40 years. He wrote important works in the field of linguistics and educated many students. However, he never mentioned his role on D-Day. This was his biggest secret. In the early 1990s, Devon's health began to deteriorate. He was diagnosed with cancer, and doctors said he only had a few months left. Before his death, he wrote a letter to his daughter Elizabeth. In the letter, he detailed what he had done on June 6, 1944. "Dear Elizabeth," the letter began, "there's a story I've never told you. A war story. A story of a lie. But sometimes, a lie told at the right time can save thousands of lives." When Devon died in 1992, his daughter, in memory of him, left a small radio model at the American cemetery in Normandy. When the cemetery attendant asked the reason for this, Elizabeth just smiled and said, "My father understood the importance of the right words." The truth emerged in 1998, after Devon's death. When the Allied forces' D-Day records were made public, a footnote explained the reason for the sudden change in German artillery fire at Omaha Beach: counter-communication operation code name, Bluff. A BBC documentary investigated Devon's story. Historical records confirmed the impact of Devon's action. The redirection of German artillery fire had given critical minutes to the American troops advancing in the middle section of Omaha Beach. Historians tried to calculate the impact of Devon's action. According to rough estimates, the redirection of artillery fire saved between 2,100 and 2,500 American soldiers on Omaha Beach that day. 60 years after the landing in 2004, during D-Day commemoration ceremonies in Normandy, the U.S. president specially recognized Devon's daughter Elizabeth and praised her father's courage. Elizabeth couldn't hold back her tears as she told her father's story. "My father always said sometimes you need to break the rules to survive," said Elizabeth. "That day, thousands of soldiers returned home because my father had the courage to tell the right lie at the right time." Devon's story is commemorated today with a modest exhibit at the Normandy Landing Museum. In a simple glass box, a rusted SR 300 radio and a small note. "Sometimes the greatest weapon of courage is a lie." The museum's director, Jean-Pierre Benamou, says while telling Devon's story, "This is not just a story of courage, but also a story of human intelligence." Devon changed the course of the war with just a radio and a good accent. Every year on June 6, the anniversary of D-Day, Devon's family visits Omaha Beach. As they walk on the beach, they imagine the impact of Devon's 30-second bluff. Among those landing on that day were the grandchildren and great-grandchildren of those who survived thanks to Devon's lie. Devon's grandson Michael wrote a book about his grandfather, 30-Second Bluff, the forgotten hero of Normandy. The book tells the story of Devon's life, language education, and his role during the war. While writing his book, Michael spoke with his grandfather's students at Oxford. They all said the same thing: Professor Devon understood the power of language better than anyone. Dr. Richard Taylor, one of Devon's students, says, "He taught us how words could change the world. But he never mentioned how his own words had changed the world." There were thousands of unnamed heroes on D-Day. George Devon was just one of them. But his 30-second bluff changed the course of the war and shaped the world we know today. Devon's gravestone shows only his name and dates of birth and death. Below is a Latin phrase, "Vox potestas estate," voice is power. A simple lie saved thousands of lives. George Devon's 30-second bluff was perhaps the most effective words of World War II. In Normandy, on Omaha Beach, hundreds of tourists walk along the shore every day. Most try to imagine what happened there that day. But very few know how a radio operator changed the course of history with a radio and a 30-second lie. Devon's story reminds us of the complex nature of war. Sometimes heroism is not about killing the enemy but saving your friends. Sometimes courage is not about firing a gun but speaking. And sometimes the most powerful weapon is not a rifle but a word. If this story moved you, please don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. Every week we bring to light the forgotten heroes and stories of World War II. Write to us in the comments section where you're watching from. Thank you, and we'll be back next week with another forgotten story.